Hello everybody, this is my behind the scenes of how I created my 3D VTuber model. Of course, I made my model using VTuber Studio. It is a completely free VTuber making application, and it updates pretty frequently with tons of presets to choose from. Now when making my model, I used this person's free 3D model as reference just for like the body proportions. So I will be putting the link for that in the description if anybody wants to check that out. So the very first thing I did here was create the body for the model, again using that other model as reference. I changed up the body's proportions. I was torn between using the default female or male body because my character is intentionally androgynous, but I do kind of prefer like the curvature of the female model, so I went ahead and went with the female model. I just went ahead and flattened the chest out, I made the eyes a little wider. While I was doing this, I did have a reference of my character I was modeling open inside of Ibis Paint so I could pick the colors correctly. So here I picked the skin color, and the overall color scheme of my character is very on the desaturated side, so I was just trying to get the right shade that I wanted to achieve that look. So the very first thing I went in and decided to start working on was the face, because it'd be much easier to build the hair and the outfit if I have the face down first. So I go through and I pick many of the presets that I already like, because it's much easier to work with presets than just, freehanding everything. If you do have the artistic experience to freehand everything, you really can, but I don't really have that level of artistic intuition, so I was just trying my best to use these presets and also use these sliders to match the style of my VTuber character the best as possible. So while making the head, I would basically go back and forth between presets and also constantly be making changes to the head. I didn't actually finish the face and the head basically until a few days ago, because the eyes and the face in general are a very important part of any character, and if something looks off, it's gonna throw everything off. So you really do have to take your time and make sure that you like the decisions that you're making and you want to express what you're trying to get across with your characters. So here I'm just adding a simple shadow layer. The layer around the face is basically to shadow the hair and the bangs, and then I added a nose shadow. I actually ended up changing this because I just couldn't really get into like the vibe of the darker shadow on the nose. So I do try to adjust this for like a whole hour. I was really stuck on this, but in the end I just ended up going with a highlight on the nose instead of a shadow, and I think it looks really good. I usually see people using shadows for more lighter skinned characters, and then like a highlight on the nose for darker skinned characters. I know people don't do it all the time, but I do see it frequently in models, so perhaps it's just the contrast that just looks better on the skin tone. Now here you don't see it, but I actually exported these irises and I put them into Ibis Paint, which I was not recording, but I do believe I can put the time lapses in here. But basically I don't ever exactly just like use the presets. I still do like to add my own touch to it, and of course my character's eyes were different from these eyes. I just used them because they had like the cross in them and it was similar, but I did need to change up the colors, and I did add my own shading inside of Ibis Paint and my own highlights. I do the exact same thing with these eyebrows here. I exported those, I exported the eyelashes. These lemmas are the only things I did not export because they're pretty easy to just shade in yourself inside of VTuber Studio. So there I imported the eyebrows after making them a little bit darker. I believe now I'm working on these, this eyeliner inside of Ibis Paint. So here I imported the eyeliner, and basically I just added a simple gradient to the ends because my character does have a gray gradient at the end of their eyelashes. And then here I'm just adding a little bit of detail and more color to the eyeliner just so it can be a little more interesting. Here I'm adding these eyelashes, and I actually really did like adding the eyelashes. I don't know what it is, I just feel like adding eyelashes just is so fun. I make them come out of the middle part with that lighter gray color just to add more depth. So the darker lashes are in the back and the lighter ones are in the front. That way we have this layered look instead of them blending in together. I just cut in a little bit into the eyeliner here just to add more illusion of lashes. I airbrushed on the eye bags, and I also decided to throw on some eyeshadow. Even though my character doesn't originally have eyeshadow, I just thought it would look nice and the eyes would pop a little bit more. And there also was this sparkly eyeshadow brush that I found in Ibis Paint. So I went ahead and threw the colors into Ibis Paint so I could add those on. And I did actually make it darker so it's a little more subtle. Now I believe later on I actually removed the eye bags from the eyelid layer because I did not realize that it was being layered on top of the bottom eyelashes. So it was basically floating on the face and it looked really weird. What I should have done earlier on was just go ahead and airbrush that on the cheeks. The mouth for me is something I struggled with for a very long time. I actually did not get this, get the mouth finished and polished to a way that I like it until my very last recording, just because the mouth is just so weird to work with. At least for me, I find it so difficult. And here I'm just going ahead and fixing up the expressions. I would just like to note that I come back to expressions very often, because the more that you add to your character, the more that you will likely have to tweak the expressions. You know, the more that you're editing, you're adding hair, and you realize a certain expression isn't really caught that great with your hairstyle, and you have to go back and tweak it. I tweaked it very often. I think the mouth is the only thing I didn't touch after I finished it. I just added some simple shading in there. I did take like a while to shade the tongue because I'm just so undecisive. But anyway, again, I go in with more desaturated colors because that is the overall color scheme of my character. I don't exactly know what I'm doing when I'm shading the tongue. I just kind of know that like I wanted the front, or like the tip part, to be a little lighter, and the back would be a lot darker so it can contrast with the teeth. Eventually I settled on something that I liked, and I believe I kept it like that the whole time. Or actually, I think I went back one more time, and yeah, that was it. Again, I'm working on this mouth. I really don't know how people get the mouth so well. Maybe it's just my perfectionism, right? But I don't know, I always think the mouth's like super weird, so I just try my best. So here I'm just adding a simple eyelid like crease just to indicate where the eyelid is. Here, once I have a rough idea of what the face looks like, I go ahead and start on a basically just rough going over of the hair. I have dabbled in VTuber making before, but I never actually like fully completed a model. I mostly just like did like the hair and the face because I find that the most fun parts. I find clothes very difficult, mostly because I'm very new to art. I find clothing folds to be pretty difficult because I'm just newer at art, and I find shading clothes and fabric very difficult. But anyway, here I go ahead and just make all the bangs. I try my best to separate the different preset groups, because there's groups for the bangs and the back of the hair and like, you know, side hairs. So I make sure to do everything that is going to be in the front with the bangs. I will say a good tip here is to just make sure you use varying widths of brushes. It's a lot easier to think of the hair as chunks or parts, so bigger parts can be wider, and if you would like to add detail or if there are smaller strands, make sure those are smaller. Try to give variation instead of sticking to one size, and it'll definitely look better. So here for the bangs, if you notice, I did add 3 very large hair strands just to cover up the skin that was leaking through from the thinner hair strands. And here I opened up a side preset and started working on the side bangs or side hairs. I'm really not sure what they're called, but anyway. I don't really feel like I'm the best at making hairs. I feel like sometimes it can just look really stiff, so I'm just kind of banking on the hope that the shading will make up for it. Black hair is less work to shade, and in my case, my character's hair is very detailed, so that should make up for my lack of expertise in VTuber. I will say there are multiple different ways to do side hairs. For me, I'm actually going from the sides of the head and coming in front and curving, but a lot of people actually just use their brush and curve it almost like a J, and then you have the illusion that it is coming from the heads, but it's actually a straight on hair strand. Doing it like that also gives the hair more of a 2D look rather than a 3D look. It sounds like a fun idea that I could probably try, but I'm a little scared to do that right now. So for the back of the hair, I just go ahead and put a little procedural hair guide. These are basically hair guides that already have hairs on them. And since this is just like the far, back of the head that is closest, it doesn't need to be extremely detailed. It just needs to be there so then I can add on to it. So here I'm just pulling up the bangs so it can meet with those back hair strands that I made earlier on. Here I opened up an extra group and basically, here I opened up an emoji group and I used that for the longer strand of hair that is away from my character's face. That's where I use the method whereas instead of having it poke out, you just draw a J-like shape on the front and then it'll give the illusion. For this hair, I actually just draw along the curve so I can get the shape that I need. And I also do that for the next one that I create. I add my cat ears here. I know that people can also make custom cat ears with hairs, but I just went ahead and used the default cat ears because I didn't want to really, deal with that. But here I was just seeing how the glasses would look because my character does have glasses, and they don't have that many glasses types. And here I actually spend a good chunk of time going ahead and getting my tail out of the way. I put it there and I actually colored the whole thing, even with the ginger colors that you don't see on my hair yet, because I just wanted to get the tail out of the way so I wouldn't have to deal with it again. I actually find coloring the tail pretty satisfying. It was pretty easy in my opinion. I just added a little bit of brown to my gray so it would soften the look, and then I added a kind of ring around the orange so it could more so blend into the gray because those are two very different colors. So I didn't just want it, looking like it was blotched on there. So here I actually use the method where you use hair as accessories. Basically, you straighten out the hair and then you go ahead and you shape it how you need. In my case, I shaped it into a headband because my character does wear a headband. So I went ahead, drew that over using the symmetry tool, and placed it in front. So here I add another procedural guide, and this was just for the hair in the back again. I actually tweak with this a lot because I'm very indecisive and I was genuinely unsure of what I wanted to do or really how to do it. I was also just messing with the sliders because I think the twist looked cool. I eventually just settled onto strands that more so looked like this. I do tweak it for a very long time just because I'm trying to make sense of the shape and how I want the hair to flow. My character's hair is, I wouldn't say it's not curly, but it's like very soft waves. So I did not want it to look harsh. So I go ahead and add a simple bone to it, and I just want to see how it reacts to movement. And after doing that simple test, I went ahead and I set up bones for every single hair strand. And here I also set up the bones for all the other hairs that I have. I found that the sweet spot for me was keeping the stiffness at 0.2 for hairs that are more flowy, and for hairs that shouldn't be moving as much, like the hairs that stick out and need to be more prominent instead of floppy, I kept the stiffness at 0.4. In terms of where to place the bones, try to place them at least half or lower. Most of the time you do not want a bone going all the way up to the head because that will just make the whole strand floppy. The hair has to have some type of structure to it. So here I'm just seeing how the hair interacts with movement. I believe I go back and forth multiple times just so I can get the bone correct, and that way I can use it as a basis when I need to add more hair strands later. Once I was satisfied with the main hair, I went ahead and added the bones for the stray hairs. When they moved how I looked, I went back to the face because I wanted to add a shadow under the bangs. I also went to the body sheet and added the shadow under the neck. And I also removed the shell shading, the default cell shading from the body. So here I go back into the face and I refined things. I went ahead and blurred the edges of the eyes because I thought it just looked a lot nicer than having that hard edge in there. It's really up to preference, but I think it looked better. And here I go through the sliders, and again I'm looking at the face and I'm customizing the face so it can look as good as I want it to be. I moved the eye bags to the cheeks like I should have done in the first place. So here I'm just going back and tweaking the hairs. And this is what I was saying before. You really want a baseline for your face so you know what's happening with the hair. And once you have the hair, you're going to frequently go back to the face because the hair is going to change the silhouette of your face. So here I actually duplicated the hanging bangs and I used my shader color. And what I did was I pulled the duplicate backwards so that way it could be a moving shadow for the bangs. This is a method used by a lot of people. I will say the only downside is that you can occasionally see the shadow moving, but really if you're not being too wild with your movements, it's not going to be too crazy. Just make sure that when you do this, you match the exact bones and stiffness of your original bangs, and that way the shadows are not going to be flying around everywhere. So here I'm just tweaking the hair again. I go back through the expressions to make sure it's alright with the current face silhouette. I actually added a small highlight to the cheeks where the cheeks kind of protrude outward and light would hit it from the top. Actually go in and add a eyeliner ring to the bottom of the eyes just because I really like eyes that have this sort of style. So I wanted to see how it would look. I went between just black and white, and I ended up liking the grayish black more, so I went ahead and stuck with that. So here I was trying for a very long time. It was actually basically 2 hours. I was trying to recreate the veil that hangs off of Rena's head. I just couldn't get it right. I know that you can make custom accessories with hair. It's just whenever I wanted to move it to the other side of the texture, it would kind of curl around itself, and you would be able to kind of like see it even when you're not supposed to. The way to fix it would be to create a new texture for every single piece of hair, but I really just didn't feel like doing that, so I decided I would just make it a head accessory later on. So anyway, I tried looking on Booth to maybe find like a ribbon or fabric that I could hang off the hair. I unfortunately could not find one that I wanted to use. They were mostly just like bows, but I wanted more of a like flowy fabric. So anyway, I start working on the hair again. I add this strand that's kind of between the start of the back hair and the side bangs. Just so there could be a little transition there. I push it in really close to the head so you basically cannot see the skin there, and it just indicates that that is where the hair starts. I tweak this back hair for a very long time again because I just want to get the shape right. I actually go back to the headband, I just pull it up a little because I want it more emphasized. Here I actually ditch my own mouth. I just go ahead and select a preset that had nice lip shading. I went ahead and went with this one. I think it looks really cute and it pops really well. I go back and just refine things that were from my rough doing before. I outline my eyeliner with black just so it pops out a bit more. I add a harder shading onto the eyes just so they're a bit more defined because I found that it was kind of blurring into the eye whites just a little. I add a little bit of shadow above the eyelid just to give that a little more definition. I add a just very thin white rim light to the nose. I was thinking about adding shadow to the other side, but I didn't really like it. So I tweak the mouth again. I picked the color from the lips and I actually darkened it so it would blend in better. And here I just go through the expressions again one more time because I have changed the lips and I've changed the eyes, so I gotta make sure that everything looks right and it's as expressive as I want it to be. So at this point I get rid of those just default clothes that I had on, and I go ahead and add templates that I'm going to create in the custom clothes later. My character Reneth has a very simple outfit. It's basically just a suit because it's basically just like a wedding suit, so it's not too extravagant. I just add on every single template that I think I need. So like I add the skirt for the little fabric on the side and I just cut off half of it. I was going to go with the long coat at first, but I found that it wasn't really tight to the body how I wanted it to be, so I actually just go with this short sleeve shirt that is tighter to the body, and I found that you can actually make it into long sleeves. So here I'm just giving all the clothes basic shapes and colors that I know are going to be there. I found out that this coat can be very long, so that made me very happy. That's basically just going to be the trail. And I use a bodysuit to just add in this little part of ripped fabric here, torn fabric. I'm not sure, honestly. Here I was trying to figure out why the top wouldn't go away. I actually just needed to erase it myself. Again, I checked how the model looks just with simple animation. I actually make the tail a little bigger, and I push it out just a little more because I noticed just from the animation it was clipping with the coat. And here I go into the look section and I actually re-add the outlines that I previously took away. I just think the model looks a lot better with outlines to it. And with that, I was very happy and very satisfied with what I had so far. The last step was to just texture all the clothes and the model would basically be finished. I opened up my model again the next day, and this time I was basically ready to go ahead and finish all of the clothing. The clothing for me was very difficult. I essentially spent 2 days on it just because it was just very hard for me to get things right, and I'm not like, you know, a professional artist or anything, not by any means. I'm very much a beginner, even though I've been drawing for like a few years. So it was just very hard for me to try and process, you know, clothing folds, which is, you know, another reason why I just didn't want to make like a 2D model, because I just don't understand how clothing folds work. Whenever I make drawings, I try to shade more based on light and shadows rather than actually making folds in the clothes. I make folds if I know, like, for sure there's gonna be one there, but yeah, essentially I was doing I was doing a whole lot of work in Ibis Paint and also a whole lot of work in the VTuber texture editor. I was basically just exporting all my parts and changing their colors in Ibis Paint, because when you are doing your colors in VTuber Studio, it's very easy for the colors to get mixed up, because if you're color picking, there can be a slightly off gradient, and then you have multiple colors. So I was using Ibis paint to set all my clothing to one solid color, and two, sometimes VTuber Studio has just like rougher lines, and the textures themselves are not as smooth, so I would also smoothen out some areas inside of Ibis paint. I actually ended up changing the type of pants that I wanted. My character does originally have like really tight dress pants, because again it's a suit, but I just didn't really find myself liking how it looked on the character itself. So I decided to go with the wider legged pants, and I actually really liked the shape that it gave to their legs, so I went ahead and changed that. And I added a little slit to the front because I just wanted to add a little bit more style. So here I'm just using the sliders, and I was just tweaking how everything interacted with each other. I will put my reference image on screen just so you can see what I was using as an example. So I was trying to, get all the clothing to fit correctly, just so it can kind of mimic what that reference image's outfit is. I also went ahead and added some sheer tights underneath the pants, just because I know I didn't really want exposed skin there. I only really wanted the exposed skin on those ripped leggings, the hands, the chest, and that was about it. Here I was just checking how the clothing interacted with the model's movement. I thought everything looked okay for now, so I went ahead and just kept fine-tuning the clothing. Again, it was a very long process, and I very much admire people that make VTuber models because I find it extremely excruciating. At least in this case, I honestly didn't even really like my own outfit. Not to say that I didn't like it, it's just I really did not like working on it. So for me at least, I really like making my clothing with just color first and then outline later. I've seen a lot of processes that prefer to do their outlines first and then lighting later. I just find that it's much more easier for me to visualize what I'm making if I just have the shapes first. It's kind of similar to how artists that do lineless art make their art pieces. Sometimes they sketch, but most of the time they just use blocks of color and shape out how they want it to look. So again, here I'm using the sliders, and I made another change that is different from my character's design. Basically, their suit is supposed to go over the belt, but instead I actually put it under just because I wanted a smaller waist silhouette. I found out the shape of the silhouette before just wasn't really to my liking. And here I actually replaced the skirt because it just wasn't giving me the customization sliders that I needed. So I instead used a dress, went ahead and got it the correct color, and of course I was able to get more customizations for the fabric there and could tuck it under the belt. So I started working on this vest inside of Ibis Paint X. I was basically on this vest all day long. This current section of the recording basically was over 7 hours, and a lot of it was just me watching videos on the side and getting distracted. But I was mostly just at my computer trying to figure out how to shade this vest because I had my reference image. I kind of had an idea of what I wanted it to look like. It's just a problem of me not having enough experience and having no idea how to draw and shade clothing properly. So I did the best that I could that wouldn't get me frustrated and could get the model finished. I made a ton of changes. I'm talking about this now, but it still comes up about 10 minutes later where I'm just still working on the vest. It's a little insane. I maybe hyper-focused on it a bit too much, but it was just really frustrating me that I couldn't really get it to look right. But anyway, I cut all of that out because it was really just a lot of going back and forth and a lot of the model just sitting still. So here I did something. I was still trying to tweak the shading because it just wasn't looking right. It still doesn't look right, but that's just something I have to deal with because I'm not at that level of artistry yet. Honestly, when I'm looking at it, it doesn't look that bad from far away, but I was just really nervous about how it would look up close. But anyway, I left it like that. I decided to move on to something else because I knew I was hyperfixating for way too long. I decided to just make the shirt, which I think the shirt turned out pretty nice. Basically, the texture of it was just going to be kind of not like sweater-like, but on the thicker side. So it's got are they ribbed lines? I forgot the proper term for them. But here I removed the shading again because I started working on the vest again. And this time I'm pretty sure I actually did it almost entirely in VTuber Studio. I'm not sure if I switched to Ibis Paint once. It may have been to grab something or color something very briefly, but I decided to just directly paint inside of here, and perhaps switching tabs is what was confusing my brain with the shading. So anyway, I actually decided to start off with the button because I did shade the button in one of my past attempts and it actually looked pretty okay. The only difference here is that I used a more desaturated color because my character's color scheme is a little more desaturated, so it's more of a brown button instead of the shiny golden button that I used beforehand. So here I decided to just shade the vest to represent the character. Maybe it would help me better if I could see exactly what I was doing, which I do feel like was helping because just having the texture out in IBIS paint almost feels like kind of like a blindness, and you can't exactly see it all properly on your model unless you import the texture back. I know that for the vest, I really wanted the shadow to be at the sides, and really only the like very front, like at the belly, would be a lighter shade of gray. I just wasn't really sure how to shade it properly. If there's one thing to take away from my process video, do not copy any of my clothing processes. Just don't. It would be very, very helpful for you to learn how clothing folds work, how fabric works, how to shade with clothing, because if you don't, and if you want to attempt your own VTuber model, some things are just going to end up looking awkward because you don't fully understand what you're doing. Which is another reason why I was pretty afraid to try and make my own models. I'm very inexperienced, and I just kind of feel a fear that I'm doing something that I really have no business doing, even though, you know, these programs are free for everybody and not just professional artists. But either way, I decided to move on from focusing on the vest once again. I shaded the long sleeves, and I actually went in to shade the skin because I felt it was feeling really flat and throwing it off because I hadn't shaded it yet. I just went ahead and added my shader color that was around the neck and around other areas. I added it around the shirt, and I also used this cool technique to add shading to the chest plane. Basically just airbrushing and then using a hard brush on one side to give an effect of like soft light on the other side of the muscle. I see people do that a lot, and it ends up looking really good. I just knew that for my model, even though I was focusing on the vest quite a lot, I know that people are going to be looking at the front of my VTuber model, and the face to chest area is going to be the most prominent area and the most recognizable area. So I was very afraid that if I did not get the vest right, it would just look downright terrible. And, you know, halfway through this process, I'm thinking, you know, okay, maybe I should just hire somebody to make me a really simple model or something like that. Or I was thinking maybe I can get an artist to shade this vest for me, but I'm not sure how much time that would have taken or how much money that would have taken. I mean, it's not a massive project, but still, you're taking somebody's time, so it could be at least, an hour or two, depending on how detailed they get into it. Perhaps I could have decided to make that decision, but I don't know. So after I took the vest just a little more, I head down to the pants because the pants need some shaping. Again, even just a little bit of terrible shading can make things look a little okay, because it's just awkward looking at flat colors, at least for me. There has to be at least something there for my brain to get the idea that, okay, we're doing something here. I didn't necessarily struggle with the pants, I was just more so winging it. Again, almost like with the vest, I know that I wanted the sides to be darker and the front was going to be a bit lighter because that is kind of where the light is going to be hitting. I basically abandoned all of the shading, or almost all of it, because I actually decided to take the pants into ibis paint. So here I move on to the drape of fabric. I actually just test out 2 little ways of doing it. I'm not sure what either of the ruffles are called, but I decided going with the second style because my brain finally figured out how clothing folds worked, and I actually really liked how that looked. And here I just add some simple shading. Inside of Void first, I just went over with hard brush and then I blurred off the sides, not the entire thing, but just the sides. And then I created a new layer on multiply and airbrushed it and made sure to erase the extras because for some reason Void does not have like a clipping function or like a mask function. And then I changed the color of the outlines by exporting it to ibis paint and then changing the color, importing it back in. And here I actually exported the pants to ibis paint. While I was in ibis paint, I actually just looked up inside of their default templates and grabbed one of their jean textures. So shout out to ibis paint for that, because my pants were just super flat and I know that I could not just texture the whole thing myself because I lack way too much experience for that. That is not my realm of expertise at all. I have never made like jeans or denim in my life in a drawing. So yeah, I just went ahead and took that just so I could get rid of that flatness. And here for this shirt, I was actually working on the it's not a necklace, but it's like a ruffled choker handkerchief thing that my character has. Basically I went to Ibis Paint, I got a ruffled brush, so shout out to this brush, feel free to download it, it's a free Ibis Paint brush. And I just went ahead and configured it to the exact same shape and color, and I imported it back inside, and to my surprise it actually looked pretty nice. I also knew that there was like the white circle. I'm not entirely sure what that was, you know, on my gacha character, but I decided to turn it into a gem, you know, an embedded gem, like on a choker. So I also used another Ibis Paint template, which was an engagement ring, and I just fitted it to the circle on the inside, added some shading around it for depth. And that was essentially the end of that. Honestly, I really liked doing the ruffles, and I do think it brought the top half of my character a lot more together than it was originally. For the belt there, I just simply color picked a lighter color, got it on, and lowered the opacity so it wasn't as prominent. Now that I'm looking at the sleeves, I'm probably going to turn down the shading of them because they look a little too dark here. I'm not sure if I tweak it later in the recordings, but if I don't, then future me will tweak it. So here I was working on the trail. Trail. I forgot what the thing is called. I think it's trail. Train? Is it a wedding train or a wedding trail? You know, if you've got like a really long dress and you know the things like dragging down the carpet. I don't know which one is the correct. Anyway, I went back into Ibis Paint. I made it all the same solid color because I noticed there were just multiple colors converging in the same area. So I got it all one solid color. I went ahead and put the white rim back, just using the same white color I've been using for everything else. It's not exactly white, it's like a light creamish color. I was going to do the shading inside of VTuber Studio, but I rejected that idea and instead started doing it inside of Ibis Paint. I basically shaded it the exact same way I shaded the other piece of fabric. I just put the hard shadows down. I blurred the edges of them. And then I put gradients around it, a darker gradient at the top and the bottom, and a lighter gradient across the middle because that's more likely where light is going to hit things. I imported it back, and I just had to tweak things a little because there was some weird texture stuff going on here because this half was going onto the other half. once I was finished with that, I just went ahead and shaded the stockings underneath. Nothing too crazy, just enough to, give a signal that there is form here. Looked around how the model moved again. I noticed that the back of my shirts, I forgot the shading, so I went ahead and slapped that down. And at this point, I was almost there. The last thing I needed to do was the shoes, which was very simple. I did not want to overdo it. I was not overthinking it. Because my character shoes are just straight up black, platform like dress shoes. There was nothing fancy to add, no fancy design. So I just went ahead and added some laces, putting in a lighter color between the black. Added some shading behind it, highlights on top of it, and blurred out all of those, and lowered the opacity of that. Colored the whole side of the shoe black, and then just some simple shading on the side of the shoe, again using black and then a lighter color and blurring it. And then I fixed the rest of the pants because the shadows just were not shadowing properly. And then I brushed on just a lighter color again, just for more light at the front. And at this point, I was pretty okay with what I had so far. Finally, I was done with the treacherous clothing process, and I can finally get to what I wanted to do the entire time, which has been to color my hair. Several times during the clothing process, I just wanted to stop completely. I just wanted to stop halfway and just tell myself, just do the hair and finish. Just do the hair. And while my mental probably would have benefited from doing my favorite part first, I had to hold on, or else I knew that the whole model would not be finished. But essentially, once I got past the hurdle of the vest, I was immediately in the groove. I decided just to add a few more hairs just to give my hair more definition. There were a few strands that I was missing from my original character. I duplicated the back hair and just made it a little bit shorter just so there could be, again, more differences in the hair. I went ahead and labeled the bangs, and I actually had the fun experience of creating different material colors for my hairs. Reneth has 4 different hair colors, so I needed 4 different materials to combine all these together. The combinations were black and orange, white and orange, black, white, and orange, and then a gradient of light gray to black. This whole process was just super satisfying to me. There was nothing that I found particularly frustrating. It was more so just a learning curve to understanding how the textures move around. I eventually realized that VTuber models have a ton of customization possibilities when you take into account all the different materials you can create. I don't recall there being a material limit, so theoretically you could have a character that has every single strand being a different color. on the spectrum, which I find incredible. I was already getting more pumped up once I added in just the first bits of hair textures, because it started to really feel like Reneth was coming together now. The first thing I did was create the white and orange texture, because that was the most prominent feature, in my opinion, of Reneth's hair, being the big white and orange that are supposed to resemble a calico cat. Honestly, I'm not sure if for me, Reneth is a calico cat themselves or just has those colors. It's undecided, at least for me and my lore so far. My very first design for Reneth actually was a completely different take. It was still the wedding design theme, but the suit was actually white and the colors were soft browns and oranges. And I believe the eye color was brown as well. But of course, with my new lore ideas for Reneth, the suit ended up being black, just because of lore reasons I cannot disclose right now. But more will come to light eventually. I guess you could say the only part I had quote-unquote trouble with was this side bang here, because I noticed that even though I was matching the exact same parameters, it just didn't look the same. It never occurred to me that you could flip the texture over on its side completely, and that way it could be mirrored. So once I went ahead and figured that out, I was adding just more textures to all the other hair strands. I got to the part where I had to add a new material for my black hair, which was just the gray and black colors. That would be the main colors of my hair. Honestly, I do love the orange though. Perhaps I will add more stray hairs of orange. Just little small orange hair strands. And once again, I was pretty happy with what I did, and I know that I needed to go ahead and finish because this recording was extremely long. So I just took a little bit of time to tweak the face hair models, and that was that. So I opened this up again for, I believe, like the third day, and I just went back in to change some of the textures. I'm pretty sure I lightened up the shadows on both of the jacket and the vest, and today I would be working on the hair shading. So my strategy for this was basically just some simple cell shading to just define the edges, and then at the top and the bottom of the hair I just used an airbrush and airbrushed on a darker multiply layer just to give it a little more depth. Here for the bangs, I added this little line just to indicate other hairs. I didn't actually do this for anywhere else, I just did it for the bangs because it's a big section of hair, so you don't want it to exactly look flat. as I was doing the hair shading, I actually exported layers that I would need later on. So I believe I exported the cell shading, I exported the highlights, I exported even some of just the airbrush, just so I wouldn't have to draw it over and over again. I would already have it. I just have to import it to the material and then use. But overall, the hair shading was relatively easy, mostly because I just kept it very, very simple. I know that I can't do like extremely detailed, hair shading that a lot of other people do with VTuber models. I don't know how they do it, but I just wanted to stick inside my comfort zone and do what I know I could do with the hair. Here I add these little dot highlights just to add a little extra shine. I actually ended up removing these later on. I used my model with these on, but I actually updated it. And I have a final version that I will now be using from now on. The hair wasn't necessarily difficult. The only thing I kind of had problems with was the big section of hair that's beside the bang, and I believe it's just because it's so big, the texture was just stretching a lot, so it wasn't exactly meshing well with the other hairs beside it. I tried my best to tweak it, got it to a place where it could kind of just, fade out the way I wanted it to. For the back of the hair, I kept things relatively simple just because I was feeling very, very lazy, and I know that I'm not necessarily going to be showing the back of my head anyway, because, I'm not going to be in VR or anything. What I wanted to pay the most attention to was my face, because that's what most people are going to see, and you have to make sure that when people look at your character, whatever character you have, whether, it's a PNG or 2D VTuber model or 3D VTuber model, you have to make sure that is appealing enough for people to want to look at, because that's all they're going to be looking at through all of your videos. So the back of the hair looks bad in my opinion, but I couldn't be bothered to, furnish it out properly. So after the hair, I actually went and textured the headband. I also kept this very simple. I just put a base color, had a dark shadow around it, and then just a slight highlight. And in here, I was just tweaking the hairs. I added back my glasses because I need to make sure I have the glasses on while I'm adding more details so I can understand how the face is framed. I found that I didn't have enough distinction in shadows, so I added a little darker bang of shadows. I also went ahead and textured my ears. I didn't think anything too, difficult. I just went in with the darkest color that was at the top. For the white, I picked the same white out of my hair so it would match the same color. And I was basically just shading off of pure instinct. I went back into my chest and I tweaked the shading there because I didn't like how there was just like a big blob of like cell shading, and it was actually a good idea that I did because I realized I did not shade where the ruffles were. And here I went and added in my earrings. I think there was probably different ways you could go about doing this, but at least for me, my first instinct was to just make the freehand guide very tiny, and then morph it around my ear to how I wanted it. Again, there's probably like a much better way to do it, but I don't know. I'm not too expertise. I would rather just make it very tiny and use that as my guide. For the smaller one, I just duplicated it and then moved it downwards. The shading for this was pretty easy. I was just thinking about, how it would reflect like a ring. There's usually just hard shading, and then there's, the highlights for it. At this point, I was just doing finishing touches, so I went in and colored in the nails because I completely forgot to do my nail polish, so I needed to do that. To do the nails, I just went into ibis paint and I just basically duplicated that one little nail I drew and put it over on the fingers, and then I also mirrored it to the other side with duplication, and that way I wouldn't have to draw on every single one of the nails. I also did the shading inside of ibis paint. I just put a simple darker ring around it and then like a little stripe of highlight. So at this point, I was attempting my veil. This was just my first attempt. I was basically just trying to, like 2D it on there. I'm just using a flat plane. I did figure out how to flatten out the figured out how to flatten the hair wider. I thought you had to press on the hair, but you actually have to press on the freehand guide, and then when you scroll down to the side, there will be something called width ratio. That's what you have to increase to make it a lot wider than it can get than just the hair itself. So after I spent the time on this veil, I actually just ended up just scrapping it. I just felt like it felt very off where the hair was, and I didn't really like its position, so I just ended up getting rid of it. Other than that, I just went back in and I was adjusting the bones for the new hairs that I made. Went to see how they interacted, just did some animations. And here I spent a while tweaking the ear fluff so it would stick out properly. And that was essentially it. That was the final version of the model that I used for a few of my videos. Now here, this is actually very recent. I updated my model this day, so I'll just quickly describe what I did because I didn't record it. I went back into Face because after watching my videos, I kind of realized some things just weren't emphasized enough for me, so I made the ring around my eyes a lot darker, and I also made the pupils darker. I also went ahead and made the eye bags darker. I made my eyelashes darker, just so everything could pop out a lot more. And I also made the shading from the hair darker, and I just went ahead and brought it down to the bangs because I just think that it looked a lot better than how I had it the first time. So in terms of hair, I did the first way that I did the side bangs, and I actually decided to do it another way that I see people do it a lot, which is basically just use the flat side of the guide and then draw it on the flat side instead of drawing it in a more 3D perspective. And with the hair, I fixed up my bangs because the white of my hair was not supposed to go all the way up. It's supposed to be at like a kind of sharp angle. And I also got rid of all of the little white dots for highlights. And I added a different type of ribbon on the side for my veil. I made those little hairs a little curvier. And in general, I just swapped some of the hair textures around. I also changed the color of my headband because it was initially like this like darkish purplish. I basically made it a desaturated green. So that was everything. I hope you guys all enjoyed my process. I do have a video about how I use my 3D model inside of Naruto and how to set that up. That will be coming out soon. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.